Concepts in a Teacup by HS Consultancy, presented by Harry Sewell.
So let's just break the term down and really try and understand what microaggressions really are about. I think it would be really helpful if we start to understand that the micro bit in microaggressions is the fact that the thing that might be racialized, Chester Pierce, who coined the term, started using it in relation to racialized microaggressions. The bit that might be racialized isn't easily identifiable. Chester Pierce gave an example from his own experience, which is kind of pretty much like this. He was in a swanky hotel, a posh hotel in the States, only black guy in the hotel lobby. A second guest walked in, who was white, approached Chester Pierce, put his bags down, offered $10 and said room 426 please, something like that. And in that interaction, the second guest, the white guest who offered the $10, didn't say N-word, person take my bags, nor did he say boy take my bags. But it appeared from the interaction as though he walked in and saw Chester Pierce as the only African American black guy in the lobby and assumed that he was the porter. The interactions seemed to suggest that. Now, in that encounter, it would be difficult to say, well, okay, that second guest was being racist because, yeah, he didn't use the N word, he didn't do anything that was explicitly racist or racialized. But the encounter, because of the repeated nature of those kind of encounters, left Chester Pierce feeling that there was a racialized pattern. And that's the kind of nature of microaggressions. So, as I say, the bit that's micro is the fact that you don't really have any evidence where you could, in a concrete way, say unequivocally, I know what you were doing. Because if you do that, you then kind of run the risk that in an accusatory tone, you tell someone what their motivations were. And of course, we can't ever prove in like any concrete way what someone's motivations are. We can say how we experienced it or what we perceived, and we can say it falls into a pattern that I've seen multiple times, but I can't say on this occasion I can 100% say what you were doing. So the micro bit really relates to that. And why might we call it a microaggression? Well, I know often the conversations around impact and intent kind of become really antagonistic because people feel, well, if we're being judged solely on the impact, it doesn't take account of if there was an error, the wording came out wrong, we had a misstep, we stumbled, then we might get lambasted because we just kind of got something wrong. But let's kind of look into that a bit more. When there is a conversation about not equating intent with impact, from my point of view at least, it's not to suggest that intent doesn't matter. If someone was speaking and they spat in your face as they were speaking, you might be really find it really unpleasant. And you might want to kind of, depending on how big that was, you might want to kind of leave and go and wash your face or get something to wipe your face, and it still leaves you feeling cringy. But it wouldn't be the same as if someone intentionally spat in your face. But as you can kind of see from that example, as someone on the receiving end of that, you're still not going to like the thing. And it still feels like some kind of form of violence. And I don't mean violence in the traditional way in which people conceptualize violence. It isn't like a hacking of another, but it unsettles, it disrupts, kind of stasis that someone might have had at that time. So it's worth kind of understanding that what we're really trying to capture in that terminology is the fact that the other person might still have experienced some kind of detriment, whether or not it was intended. So, yeah, in a snapshot, that's what the microaggressions are. Now, again, it's worth acknowledging that microaggressions as a term is sometimes used in a weaponized way, almost like wagging a finger to say, well, what you did was a microaggression. I think it really helps as a theoretical framework because if we're waiting for the big red flag stuff, as I call it, the name calling, or someone getting a spray can and writing the N word on my car bonnet in the car park, if that's what we're waiting for to determine whether or not an individual experiences something which is racialized, then in 2025, the number of those kind of big red flag incidents in the workplace in particular tend to be quite small compared with those kind of everyday grinding down impacts of microaggressions. The thing about microaggressions is that they are these kind of everyday encounters which are typified by the absence of anything that makes them explicitly racialized. But the pattern of receiving and experiencing them on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day, creates a burden. And because it happens so frequently, that pattern emerges. And yeah, it matters to people in terms of their well-being or their sense of feeling included in organizations. So each individual microaggression is like a paper cut that you might kind of go, well, it wasn't that significant, it was just a misstep. But the kind of repeated nature can sometimes feel like wounding. And whatever language we use, I think it's really helpful to not get caught up in the question about, well, you're calling it this, you're calling it microaggression, and that's not what I was doing. But to kind of step back from that into what is it about that experience that kind of caused you that injury that you describe? Is there anything that we as an organization or I could as an individual do differently? And it might kind of move in both directions. Just that openness to say, what's the hurt about? Because it's through that kind of understanding and curiosity and connection that we can kind of feel like closer into kind of moving forward, transformation, progressing as organizations and in our social groups.